A mercenary who doesn't die is third-rate. The reason they command such a high price is because they are willing to die for their master. Even if the protagonist had to listen to this kind of bullshit every single day from his employer. Well, what could he do? Such was the life of a mercenary. Nobles were all the same, painfully predictable. When they needed you, they promised land and made grand requests, speaking as though they might even grant you a title. Yet in the end, every last one of them changed their tune right on cue, spouting all sorts of creatively crafted nonsense. But what you just told me tops it all, the protagonist said to the man standing across from him. I must have misheard you. Right, Commander-in-Chief? You did not mishear me. Just now I told you to die, the commander replied. The protagonist asked whether the commander had forgotten who he was. The commander answered calmly, saying how could he forget Jake, the captain of the Fang Mercenary Corps. Jake laughed and scoffed, brushing it off as a joke. He knew this couldn't possibly be a real command. A commander wouldn't ask a worthless mercenary like him to die an honorable death on the battlefield, like one of those noble knights. The commander let out a sigh and said that perhaps he had been too blunt. He apologized for giving the wrong impression, then continued, I am simply entrusting you with one last mission. As you know, with our string of defeats, our loss has become all but certain. In the end, those traitors' blades have turned against the generational protectors of this land. They are now at the very throats of the Crawford family. Realizing there was nowhere left to retreat, I must have been rambling. Given the circumstances, I completely understand, Commander, he replied casually. Still, he knew it was about time he got out of here. For a man whose talent was renowned throughout the entire empire to be cornered like this said everything. Even so, for a noble, the commander was a sensible man. It was a shame things had come to this. And yet, a final mission in the middle of all this? Does he want me to scout out an escape route or something? If that was all, he decided he would take the job, at least until he received the rest of his pay. The mission is simple, the commander said. Tomorrow, those traitors will launch an all-out assault. Stand with me and hold them back, if only for a moment, until our lord escapes safely. No, if even that proves impossible, then hold until I die. I will settle the remainder of your payment with this when you withdraw. He pulled out a gem and held it up, saying that a gem of that size would be more than enough to cover the mercenary company's operating costs for 3 years. Before he could finish, the protagonist knocked the gem out of his hand. The commander calmly asked what he meant by that. In a deeper, more serious voice, the protagonist replied, I should be the one asking you that. Did you really take me for a fool just because I'm still smiling? You want us to act as your meat shields? Even if we help you, we can only hold out for a short while. You're throwing us away just to buy your master a little more time to run. He sneered. Fine. Let's say, by some miracle, we actually managed to hold out. Then what? Do you really think those bastards are just going to let us go? The commander said that they were mercenaries, not knights, and the enemy knew that. Once the commander was dead, the army would fall apart, and the enemy would no longer have any reason to kill the mercenaries. But that wasn't how things worked, and the protagonist knew it all too well. To those fiends, the mercenary company was nothing more than a sworn enemy, one to be slaughtered without hesitation. He recalled the tricks they themselves had used to kill countless enemy commanders, disguising themselves in the armor of enemy soldiers, feigning injury, and waiting for someone to approach before striking them down. Surely you realize that's how they managed to survive this long, he said. Right now, those bastards are more fired up about tearing us to shreds than they are about your master. As his own words left his mouth, he realized something. The protagonist paused, then continued in a startled voice. Don't tell me, are you actually counting on this? On having us draw all of their attention? It would be best if you focus solely on completing your mission, the commander replied. Otherwise, there is no other option but to kill you and take command of the mercenary corps myself. The mercenary had truly believed this knight was different from the others. Instead, he turned out to be the worst scum of all. Realizing that, he shifted his stance and reached for his blade. The commander apologized, saying he was sincere when he said that. "There's no need to apologize," the protagonist said coldly. "In fact, this is for the best. As for the head of a bastard like you, even if I offered it to those fiends lying in wait, I doubt I'd feel any regret." "Are you thinking of offering my head to the traitors and begging for your life?" the commander asked. "Yes. As much as I'd love to hand you over and flee, I'm sure you've already made arrangements to stop us." "In that case," the commander said, "as the commander, I must carry out my duty to the very end. The rebels will be satisfied with the heads of 2 commanders, and they will spare my men in return." "2?" Jake scoffed. "Don't tell me you're planning to offer your own head as well, just to save your subordinates." "Those are all people I dragged along with me," the commander replied. "I promise to show them that you can still achieve your dreams even if you start from the very bottom. They put their faith in me and followed me all this way. So I must bear that responsibility, because I am their leader." Jake laughed loudly. "Ha! Yes, that's right. That is the mark of a true leader. What a pity, if only it weren't Crawford. If only you had been my lord." Jake pounced at the commander, but lost his life. As the commander struck him down, he spoke softly, asking Jake to forgive him. Jake had expected this outcome, but he had never imagined that the gap between them would be this vast. This accursed thing they called talent, so this was it. He had already told his subordinates to flee if he did not return by the appointed hour. He could pass on without worry. After all, he had always been prepared to meet an end like this. Still, there was just one thing he wondered about. If only he had been given the same chance as his opponent. Jake lost consciousness. After a few moments, however, he heard a distant voice. Someone was trying to wake him up. He slowly opened his eyes and found a boy standing beside the bed he was lying on. He managed to ask who the boy was. Instead of answering, the boy slapped the shit out of him and begged him to wake up. That did the trick. As Jake focused his vision, he saw the boy crying and heard the boy call out a name. "Young Master Lucian." The boy kept crying. Jake, now Lucian, looked down at his own hands and wondered why they were so smooth and delicate. What had happened to his ragged, blistered hands? Only then did he finally turn his attention to the crybaby beside his bed. "I'm so relieved, young master," the boy cried out. "I really thought you were dead. My heart nearly stopped. If that had happened, I, your personal attendant, would have been in terrible trouble. More than that, it would have been a great tragedy for the house." Lucian couldn't understand a single word. Terms like young master, personal attendant, and house meant nothing to him. Not one of them had anything to do with his life. More than anything, he was certain he had died back then, so decisively that there was no way he could have survived. And yet, here he was. His neck was still attached. After thinking it over, he reached a conclusion. He had ended up inside the body of a stranger. He got out of bed and looked into a nearby mirror. What he saw made him pause. The face staring back at him was unbelievably handsome. At a glance, it was obvious that this elegant body belonged to a noble, and not just any noble, but one from a filthy rich family. First things first, he needed information. About this body. About this life. Turning around, he told Hans that he had something to ask. Hans, overjoyed that his master was alive, looked ready to do anything for him. Lucian's first question was simple. "What year is it?" Hans stared at him, assuming he was dazed from his near-death experience, and replied that it was the year 846 of the imperial calendar. That was 15 years before the day Jake had died. "Does this mean I return to the past?" Lucian sighed. "I don't know what happened or how it happened, but getting worked up over every detail won't solve anything." "Right, that's how it is. For now, I'll focus on what needs to be done." With that, he asked his second question, this time in a firm, authoritative voice. "My personal attendant, Hans. It seems you've decided to die today." Hans immediately began trembling and asked what he had done wrong. For a lowly servant to dare lay a hand on his master's unconscious body, without permission, no less, have the rules of this place changed? Lucian's eyes sharpened. If not, then answer me. Who am I? Hans bowed deeply and begged for forgiveness before answering. Young master, you are Lucian Valdec, the third son of the esteemed House of Valdec. Lucian froze. House Valdec was one of the Empire's most prestigious noble families, a pillar that had long supported the Empire, standing beside the Emperor himself, wielding power great enough to rival even the imperial family. It was a name he knew well. 15 years ago, he had worked as a guard at House Valdec for several years. And now, after dying, he had awakened inside the very same palace. Yet, he couldn't recall anything about a third son. He felt it then. This wasn't misfortune. It was an opportunity. And he was ready to face the world again, and show everyone just how high he could climb using it. Preparing himself, he set out to meet his family and learn more about the world he had been thrust into. As he walked through the corridors, he found his expectations exceeded. He had been to countless places during his mercenary days, but this was by far the most extravagant, and now, it was something he had to get used to. Still, something felt off. Ever since he stepped outside, the servants had been looking at him strangely. He asked Hans about it. It's only natural, young master, Hans replied. You shut yourself away and haven't met anyone but me for 1 year and 2 months. Lucian frowned. What kind of person would cower like that? Even though he didn't understand the ways of nobles, such behavior felt impossible, especially in a family led by the man who had long protected the Empire with unwavering principles. Archduke Sigmund. There was no way that man would stand by and watch his own son waste away in a corner. Which meant only 2 possibilities. Either Lucian had been such a troublemaker that he was on the verge of being disowned, or there was a reason compelling enough for the Archduke to turn a blind eye. Until he figured it out, Lucian decided to avoid the Archduke at all costs. That plan didn't last even a second. As he walked, a calm voice spoke from behind him, confirming that the reports of his full recovery were true. Lucian turned around. To see the young master's face after a full year brings this head butler boundless joy, young Master Lucian, the man said. Are you having any difficulty moving about? Lucian recognized him at once, Edwin, the head butler. Though he had come to the manor in his youth as a hostage from an enemy family, his exceptional talent had been recognized, and he had been entrusted with all household affairs. Archduke Sigmund's right-hand man. This is bad. Of all the people he wanted to avoid, Edwin was near the top of the list. There was no way someone like him wouldn't notice the mannerisms of a former street mercenary. The only saving grace was that Edwin hadn't seen Lucian in over a year. With that in mind, Lucian decided to imitate the most noble person he had ever met. Thank you for your concern, head butler Edwin, Lucian said calmly. I've improved greatly thanks to you. Having shut myself away for so long, I decided to come out and assess the family's situation. To think I'd run into you, fortune must be on my side. I trust the family has been well? Edwin was momentarily speechless. After a pause, he replied that everything was well and that he, too, was relieved to see Lucian in good health. Lucian pressed on smoothly. Upon further thought, how could there possibly be trouble with the head butler present? Seeing no suspicion on Edwin's face, Lucian turned to leave. It seems I worried for nothing. Well then, I'll take my leave with my mind at ease. It's my first time out in a while, and I find myself quite exhausted. Please wait, Edwin said, stopping him. You'll need to delay your return. The Archduke wishes to see you immediately. There was no escaping now. Before long, Lucian stood in his father's office. There was no greeting. No inquiry about his health. The first thing Archduke Sigmund asked was, How are you still alive? Lucian was ready for whatever came his way, but that question was something he had never imagined hearing. He looked baffled and asked what his father meant. I was going to let it slide, his father said. I could overlook you neglecting your duties and acting spoiled, even using your mother's death as an excuse. However, you crossed the line. As if shutting yourself away in your room for over a year in protest wasn't enough, you treated your own life lightly and attempted to harm yourself. For a moment, Lucian couldn't grasp what the Archduke was saying. Then it clicked. The way Hans had been crying over him when he opened his eyes. He tried to explain that it was a misunderstanding, but his father wasn't willing to listen to any more excuses. "This is your final chance," he said with absolute finality. "Lay out clearly whatever thoughts you've been bottling up inside. Wasn't that the whole point to begin with? The reason you stirred up trouble, going so far as to shove sleeping pills down your throat with those flimsy hands of yours?" Only then did Lucian's memories align. Now he understood why he had no memories of Lucian. The Archduke had 4 sons, each born to a different mother. During the 10 years Lucian had worked as a guard for House Valdek, he had encountered the young lords and their mother several times. Yet he had no memory of meeting Lucian or his mother. His mother had died of illness early on, and not long after Lucian began his post, Lucian himself, for reasons unknown at the time, had suffered a similar fate. Back then, he had simply assumed that the mother and son were frail and hadn't given it much thought. But there had been a real reason. After his mother's death, and with his already unstable position within the household, it had been too much for a child to bear. Desperate for attention, he had swallowed a high, fatal dose of sleeping pills. But after isolating himself for over a year, his weakened body couldn't withstand the drug's effects, and he died. Lucian had thought the Archduke was being too harsh earlier. Now that he understood the full situation, his actions felt almost justifiable. No matter how great an Archduke he was, he must have been in unimaginable distress as a father facing the loss of his child. Even so, Lucian couldn't afford to worry about someone else's feelings. His own foot was in the grave. The Archduke had clearly said this was his final chance. It was an ultimatum, and Lucian could practically hear his golden future cracking beneath his feet. He had to be extremely careful with his next words. If he was careless, at best he would be sent to some distant monastery to live as a priest, forever cut off from the world. At worst, he would be shipped off to a ruthless northern territory, and spend his life suffering among freezing winds and wild beasts, living a miserable, beggar-like existence. He had finally obtained a second life, even at the cost of his own neck. There was no way he was throwing it away, especially not over family drama that wasn't even his to begin with. "Since you have instructed me to express my thoughts clearly, I shall do so," Lucian said. "First, for staining the honorable name of Valdek with my impudence, and for causing you great worry, Father, I offer my sincerest apologies. This is no one's fault but my own. There are no excuses to be made. Whatever punishment you decide upon, I will accept without complaint." His father tried to interject, saying that such words wouldn't change anything, but Lucian continued without stopping. "So then, wouldn't it be acceptable to rejoice now? What has been done cannot be undone. Therefore, with the life I barely managed to hold on to, I will no longer chain myself to the past. I will live earnestly for the future. For that reason, as my father rather than as an archduke, would you grant me even a single word of encouragement? An erring child sincerely repenting before their parent, and the parent willingly embracing them, is that not, under the laws of heaven, what is right between father and son?" Edwin found it hard to believe what he was hearing. He stared at Lucian, wondering if this was truly the same boy who used to shrink away from everything. The Archduke looked down at him. "How dare you raise your voice and lecture me on filial duty?" Lucian didn't answer. He knew all he could do now was wait. "One truly does see everything if one lives long enough," his father muttered. Despite the stern tone, Lucian knew his gamble had paid off. Instead of tiptoeing around awkwardly, charging straight ahead had been the right choice. From past experience, he knew the Archduke favored people who were bold and straightforward. "It seems a brush with death has made you reckless," his father continued. "Very well. Since you speak of earnest resolve, answer me this. Lucian Valdek, what do you intend to do from now on?" Lucian replied calmly. "First, I will rebuild this ruined body of mine. After that, I will properly learn the sword." "The sword?" His father scoffed, clearly amused. You of all people? Yes, Lucian continued. Of course, I must deal with my fragile body first. But if I eat well and sleep properly, won't things work out somehow? His father chuckled. You certainly have a way with words. As for the rest of your promises, we'll see whether they're mere bravado or something more. He turned to the head butler. Give him that again. It will be more effective than words that won't sink in just yet. Edwin bowed and left to make the preparations, while Lucian stood there, completely clueless as to what they meant. It didn't take long for him to find out. That turned out to be an absurd amount of allowance. Lucian slowly began to understand what it truly meant to be a noble. He received heaps of gold coins and far more besides, and that was only a month's worth. His eyes sparkled as he stared at the wealth now in his possession. With this much, he could overhaul this body. He could make that elixir. The Archduke had not set foot in the place he was headed to now for a long time. It was a location the late Archduchess had especially cherished during her lifetime. That he was coming here now was undoubtedly because of Lucian's change. The head butler thought quietly, although he fell out of the master's favor for a time, he is still the child of her grace, the Archduchess whom the master cherished so deeply. There is no way he would abandon him so easily. After a long silence, Sigmund finally spoke. It was truly pathetic. The way his eyes constantly darted about, as if he were terrified of something, how he would whimper like a stray dog at the slightest raise of my voice. His demeanor was nothing like hers. I thought the only thing he inherited from his mother was his looks. But today, for the first time, I found myself thinking that I might have been wrong. He paused briefly, then continued. You saw it too, didn't you? The way the child met my gaze head-on and stated his thoughts. Edwin bowed in agreement. Yes. There wasn't a hint of wavering in him. It was a truly composed and dignified attitude. Young Master Lucian is thoughtful and gentle by nature. I believe he merely fell behind the other young masters for a time. After all, the master's blood flows through his veins. Sigmund smirked. That remains to be seen. What lies ahead for that child cannot be resolved with mere words. Edwin hesitated. There may already be an issue. Young Master Lucian's suspended allowance has been reinstated, but evidence of siphoning has been discovered. Our investigation suggests the second young master, Jordi Valdak, may be involved. Furthermore, he dismissed the head maid who had been attending Lucian and replaced her with one of his own people, making his intentions quite clear. Sigmund clicked his tongue. Jordi's narrow-mindedness has always been his flaw. I understand the resentment he harbors toward the third child's maternal family, but to be this persistent. Edwin asked whether he should look further into the matter. The Archduke refused. Edwin felt it was somewhat harsh for a boy who had only just begun to step forward. But Sigmund had his own thoughts. If Lucian had managed his surroundings properly, such petty schemes would never have affected him in the first place. This was simply the price he was paying for not coming to his senses over the past year. In fact, the Archduke found the situation satisfactory. He decided to sit back and see how his third son handled his affairs. If Lucian couldn't deal with this much on his own, there was no reason to expect anything more from him. A few days later, Hans watched his young master with barely contained emotion. He thought about the frail boy Lucian had been, and how much courage it must have taken for him to stand where he was now. Little did he know that the current Lucian was an entirely different person. Lucian ordered Hans to stand guard outside the door, a task the boy carried out with unwavering loyalty. Meanwhile, Lucian himself began handling alchemy tools he had never once touched in his life. His target was an herb so absurdly expensive it bordered on madness, an herb that only grew under moonlight, whose usage had yet to be properly established. The moonlight herb. To top it off, Lucian spent every last coin he had to obtain it. To anyone else, he must have seemed insane, blowing his entire allowance on a single herb. But Lucian knew better. In a year's time, its value would skyrocket to 20 times its current price. From his previous life, he knew that despite the uncertainty surrounding it, The Alchemists Guild had once swept the market clean of this herb. It had been a one-in-a-lifetime gamble with the fate of their guild on the line. Thanks to that gamble, nectar, the so-called drink of the gods, was born. They were even threatened with charges of blasphemy for daring to invoke the name of gods for a mere drug. Yet once its effects were revealed, the same people sang its praises as if none of that outrage had ever occurred. For over 1,000 years, one truth had been considered absolute and irrefutable: a warrior's level was decided at birth, and that limit could never be surpassed. Innate talent was dictated by destiny, and one's constitution was unchangeable. No matter how desperately one struggled, breaking free from that restriction was believed to be impossible. The thing that shattered this definitive law was nectar. Even those utterly devoid of talent could become usable swordsmen simply by drinking it. Lucian's version, of course, was far inferior to the original. Its quality wasn't even better than the mass-produced variants. But for restoring a body as mangled as this one, there was nothing better available at the moment. Later, when turmoil spread across the empire, the Alchemists Guild was the first to be engulfed in flames. The recipe for nectar, having overturned the balance of power, was deemed far too dangerous to exist. And so, it was erased. Yet Lucian had somehow managed to recreate something similar using whatever fragments of knowledge he remembered. Most of his teammates had died during the experimentation phase. But that didn't matter now. He had no other choice. And so, he consumed the potion. Mana, the power born from humanity's transformation of nature into itself. The quality and performance one could draw from it varied drastically depending on how well circulation was performed, the process of spreading and retrieving mana throughout the body. Right now, Lucian was using the power of nectar to forcibly widen this body's blocked pathways. He should have been in excruciating pain. Yet, to his surprise, mana flowed through his body as though it were returning to its rightful place. Even the bodies of newborn infants possessed impurities that obstructed circulation. Could it be? Is Lucian one of those so-called geniuses? Lucian stepped out through the doors and asked. Nothing happened while I was gone, right? Hans stared at him with wild, tear-filled eyes and suddenly shouted. Young master! Do you have any idea how much time passed while you were inside? Even when I called out to you, there was no response. You even warned me strictly not to enter, so I was worried sick. Lucian looked down at him and simply smiled. When Hans finally regained his composure and looked at him more closely, he noticed something was different. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but he wasn't sure whether the person standing before him was truly his young master anymore. Hans was the only person who had ever been truly close to Lucian. Naturally, he was the first to notice changes that weren't yet visible to the eye. Externally, Lucian still needed nourishment and time, so there wasn't any dramatic shift. But what mattered was what lay beneath the surface. And that was changing at an unbelievable pace. Lucian could feel it himself. His innate constitution was making this miracle possible. The boy's potential was on the same level as those who had once changed the world. If things continued this way, this body might surpass what he had been in his mercenary days, within a year. He turned to Hans and began thanking him, though Hans remained as clueless as ever. Lucian suddenly grabbed Hans by the shoulders and suggested that he sell everything and buy that. By that, he was clearly referring to the moonlight herb. Beaming as though he had reached enlightenment, Lucian spoke grandly. I truly envy you, Hans. Back in my day, nobles like this didn't exist. Hans, having no idea what was going on, stared blankly at his master and quietly convinced himself that Lucian had finally lost his mind. 1 week later, deep within a peaceful forest, Lucian and Hans were on the move. Lucian was lost in thought, contemplating this new, luxurious life. Meals were always served on time. His room was kept immaculate without him lifting a finger. In his previous life, such things were unthinkable. Skipping meals had been routine. Thanks to all this, he could devote himself entirely to his recovery. Still, something had been weighing on his mind. At this point in time, there should have been a Valdec family guard named Jake. Yet according to the guard captain, There had been no applicant who even remotely resembled him, and the post was now occupied by someone Lucian had never seen before. It was probably for the best. Running into another, Jake, would only be unpleasant and distracting. After walking several more miles, Hans hesitantly called out to him and asked whether he really intended to go in there. After all, Lucian had once sworn he would never set foot in the training grounds again. Lucian pulled a strange face. "Did I really say something like that?" Hans nodded and explained that after his brother had chewed him out during training, Lucian had declared he never wanted to return. Seeing Hans's reaction, Lucian could roughly guess what had happened. For the child of an archduke, swordsmanship was practically mandatory. It seemed the second son had used violence under the pretense of training, instilling fear in Lucian and driving him away from the grounds altogether. Lucian turned to Hans and reassured him. "That's all in the past. Trust me, and follow." Inside the training grounds, a messenger reported that Lucian had come to train on his own. The man who received the report hadn't expected to see Lucian again after what had happened last time. Still, he saw this as an opportunity to turn things to his advantage. "Report this to them," he said. "I'll prepare a delightful feast before they arrive." When Lucian entered the training grounds, he was genuinely astonished. He had expected something passable, but what he saw far exceeded that. There was an abundant supply of spare weapons that could be used without fear of breakage, along with vast open space suitable for intense training. He couldn't help but wonder, if facilities like this had been available to commoners, would some of the younger members of his mercenary team have survived longer? A voice snapped him out of his thoughts. "Dear me! So my eyes truly weren't deceiving me. It really is the third young master!" The man continued loudly. "I was so surprised that I could hardly believe it at first. I still vividly recall the time 1 year ago when young Master Geordie instructed you, and you fled without even looking back. It was like a lamb being chased by a wolf." He smiled thinly. "It has been quite some time since we last met. I am Hendrik, and I greet the third young master." Lowering his voice slightly, he added, 1 year ago, I personally assisted you in correcting your posture. Do you remember? It was such an enjoyable time." Lucian scoffed. "Would you look at this idiot?" he muttered. "How entertaining." A knight, the embodiment of honor and loyalty, typically hails from a noble family and is expected to master strict martial arts and etiquette from a young age. Upon receiving the title of knight from their lord, their existence is considered complete. In other words, they are nothing more than hunting dogs kept on expensive leashes. That is why a man is expected to be loyal to the lord who grants him wealth and honor, and to show deference to those of noble blood. For Hendrik to display such an insolent attitude, though Lucian's unfavorable position certainly played a role, was only possible because of who stood behind him. If Lucian had his way, he would have reconditioned Hendrik's brain using his own methods. However, such an action would not go unnoticed by the Archduke. Knights are, after all, the core of a noble house's power and highly valuable assets. Punishment that bypasses official procedure only creates needless tension between a lord and his subjects. Thus, Lucian spoke out with confidence. "It's absurd to avoid the training grounds just because of what happened back then. From now on, I plan to visit often, if only to learn the sword." Hendrik burst into laughter at those words, claiming Lucian was far too old to begin sword training. "Too old? At 16? Lucian asked innocently. "For your information," Hendrik replied, "anyone over 15 is considered a lost cause. Sword forms are a legacy, secret arts created by our ancestors. They grant enlightenment to those who simply follow their movements and embody ancient wisdom capable of evolving the physical body. However, such enlightenment is only meaningful for those whose mana path is open. Since that path closes at the age of 16, sword forms learned afterward amount to nothing more than basic physical training. Sword forms without enlightenment are empty, useless shells." He smirked before continuing. "On second thought, perhaps they would suit you perfectly, young master. This is your chance to become the Empire's greatest master of nothing. That way, you'll save time and find your true calling, wouldn't you?" And if not, you can always spend your days tending a garden. After all, everyone has a role they're suited for. After spewing this nonsense at a boy, Hendrik stood proudly, convinced Lucian was at a loss for words. Lucian, however, had no intention of exposing his lies outright. Instead, he chose to mock him publicly. Feigning hesitation, he replied shakily, "Lord Hendrik, for some reason that doesn't match what I remember. It seems a little too different, don't you think? The mana path doesn't close at 16, but rather around 25. So, as far as I understand, there's no issue with me learning sword forms now." "Ha! Are you absolutely certain?" Hendrik asked. "I believe you may be mistaken," Lucian replied calmly. "By any chance, does Master Geordie think so as well?" "Of course, it's nothing more than common sense." Hendrik fell silent, unable to think of a rebuttal. At least, that's what he believed. Lucian then began acting out his plan. He raised his hand and sorrowfully placed it on Hans's shoulder. "Hans, it seems the House of Valdek is now doomed. You must think so too. Of course, you have no other choice." Hans was sweating profusely as he asked what any of this had to do with him. Lucian clutched his hair as though struck by disaster, and cried out, "It's something so basic that even a stray dog would know it. How could someone of your age be so confused? It's utterly absurd. Just think of how many talented people have been robbed of opportunity because of this flawed knowledge. To think that my own brother is such an empty-headed fool!" Hendrik was taken aback by Lucian's sudden change in behavior, but Lucian continued, lamenting how disgraceful this was to his family's name. Then, in an instant, his demeanor shifted. He fixed Hendrik with a malicious stare and said, "Surely you wouldn't dare attempt to deceive me, the son of your own lord. You wouldn't be that foolish, would you?" That startled Hendrik, and he panicked, asking what Lucian meant. Lucian lowered his head and apologized softly. "I misspoke because this situation is utterly unbelievable. A knight of House Valdek would never resort to such pathetic tricks, would they?" Hendrik's face turned pale. "Oh, of course not, my lord. That goes without saying." Seeing his reaction, Lucian pressed further, warning that such misinformation could lead to the recruitment of talent under false premises. He declared that he would take this matter to his father, as it was not something to be taken lightly. Hendrik never expected things to escalate this far. Lucian had always trembled at the mere mention of his father. Since when did this little brat grow such fangs? No, he no longer looked like a brat. To Hendrik, Lucian now resembled a starving wild wolf. Before matters could worsen any further, Geordie finally stepped forward. Hendrik rushed toward his master, trying to explain what had happened. However, Geordie had already witnessed everything and was deeply disappointed in him for being intimidated by a mere child, one not even half his age. He coldly instructed Hendrik to maintain his composure and not further tarnish his name. As Geordie strode toward Lucian, Hans trembled behind his young master, frozen by the fury on Geordie's face. Lucian, on the other hand, was thoroughly enjoying the moment. Geordie was infamous for his vicious temperament, even back when Lucian served as a guard. He was the very model of a nobleman in appearance alone. Because his faction was weaker than that of the eldest son, he recruited heavily from outside sources. Most of those recruits, however, met grim ends. Once Geordie deemed someone useless, he would frame them for a crime and dispose of them without hesitation. Lucian greeted his brother with a pleasant smile, but the response he received was filled with hostility. Geordie immediately attempted to manipulate the situation, making it seem as though Lucian had brought disgrace upon the loyal knights. He claimed that, given their age, it had been a long time since they studied theory and that the confusion was understandable. In truth, the insults were aimed squarely at his brother, not the knights. Geordie was cleverly trying to incite the knights against Lucian, while preserving his own reputation before them. But Lucian was no longer the person Geordie believed him to be. He was now even more cunning than his brother. With perfect politeness, Lucian countered, "As expected of you, brother. Though there was a misunderstanding between Sir Hendrik and myself, it would only be right for you to punish me for daring to insult you. Yet instead, you have graced me with such an invaluable lesson. I called your head a helmet stand, a hollow skull, even. In any case, I am deeply ashamed to have uttered such embarrassing words. I've learned so much from this. He then ordered Hans to take notes, insisting that ordinary paper was unworthy of such wisdom, and that these teachings should be engraved on silk instead. With his performance concluded, Lucian politely asked his brother for permission to leave. Geordie clearly had no intention of letting the matter end there. However, Lucian cleverly reminded him that their father was watching his every move. That single remark halted whatever punishment Geordie had been considering. Lucian immediately took Hans and left the training grounds, whispering urgently to his attendant to run as fast as he could. After they had put a good distance between themselves and the grounds, Lucian glanced back at Hans and calmly asked whether he thought everything would be all right after what had just occurred. Hans suddenly burst into tears like a frightened puppy, insisting that even if Geordie let it slide, the terrifying mustached knight would make him disappear without a trace. Lucian realized then how much subordinates suffered when their superiors acted recklessly. Smiling gently, he reassured Hans that no one would lay a hand on him. Reaching out to his shaken attendant, Lucian said softly, "You've been through a lot because of me, Hans. I promise you this. Going forward, my foolish actions will never cause my people to be disrespected or live in fear. So let's work well together, Hans." After what happened at the training grounds, Lucian found the silence unsettling. Geordie was not the type to let things slide so easily. And just as Lucian suspected, he had begun pulling petty tricks behind the scenes. Even Hans was furious over it, as he too had been severely affected. It all began with the budget proposal that landed on Lucian's desk that day. It was supposed to be the day he could purchase more moonlight herb and acquire everything he needed, the day his balance would be replenished. That was how it should have been. Instead, when he examined the figures, he saw that his allowance had been slashed by 75%, while Hans' salary had been cut by 30%. The second young master, that bastard, had tampered with Lucian's allowance. Although the handmaid Geordie had planted in Lucian's annex was behind it, embezzlement was a serious crime, punishable by death even among high society. The only reason she could get away with such a blatant act was because there had been an opening she could exploit. After his mother's death, Lucian had delegated the management of his budget proposals to Dana, the former head maid who had served him faithfully for many years, instead of the young and inexperienced head maid currently in charge. As Lucian entered the room, she stepped forward to greet him. Her tone was unmistakably rude as she said, "At the time of my appointment, I wished to come and greet you, young master, but it seemed you had no intention of leaving your room at all. I suppose that long period of wandering is finally over now, isn't it?" Hans immediately rebuked her, demanding to know how she dared speak to her master in such a manner. Lucian stopped him, saying he would overlook such trivialities for the moment. There was something far more important to discuss. He went straight to the point and asked whether she had written the budget plan. She giggled lightly. "I was wondering why you summoned me, and it was over the budget?" "Yes, I wrote it. Since you granted the former head maid authority, I simply carried out the duties that were handed over to me. But I must say, I'm rather taken aback. You're interrogating me so harshly when I was merely doing my job diligently. This was work you were supposed to handle yourself." Lucian had already anticipated that excuse. "Very well," he said calmly. "I'll accept that part. You had no choice. However, there's something I cannot overlook. Most of the funds my father granted me were allocated toward increasing the workers' salaries. I've already confirmed this. Considering how much they suffered due to my negligence, it could be seen as compensation. But then tell me this, why was Hans' salary cut instead of raised? Don't you think that's a bit too blatant?" She gasped and insisted it must have been a mistake, claiming she had been overwhelmed with countless other tasks. She shot a sharp glance at the other maids, who immediately shrank back and hastily agreed that she had indeed been extremely busy. Lucian said nothing further. He turned and left the room. But before stepping out, he asked one final question to Jenny, the head maid. "Do you know who the master you are meant to serve is?" She smiled faintly and replied that she would have to ask young Master Geordie before answering. Lucian already knew the truth. When a part of an organization begins to rot, it must be cut away for the rest to survive. And that was precisely the situation he was in. He already had an elaborate plan in mind. Later, Lucian arrived at a gambling den with Hans in tow. Hans was visibly shocked. Lucian had said they were going fishing. Lucian simply smiled and explained that this was exactly where they could catch much bigger fish. There were several reasons Lucian did not deal with the head maid so rashly. First, Jenny was no ordinary head maid. She was the daughter of the nanny who had raised Geordie since infancy. If Lucian interfered with her carelessly, it would only make matters worse. Second, the chain of command on Lucian's side was far more chaotic than he had initially imagined. Given that the situation had already surpassed common sense, he needed a solution that matched its complexity. And finally, there was no way the Archduke was unaware of what was happening. In other words, sorting out this confusion was part of the test. Lucian intended to show his father just how capable he was, while making some money along the way. Lucian gambled with many people in that den and won every round. He did so deliberately. Once the small fish were drained dry, the shark would inevitably appear. After the last gambler quit the table, having lost everything to Lucian, he waited for him to emerge. After a brief silence, a man with a scarred face and a mountain-like build stepped out and greeted Lucian. This was Hugo, the manager of the establishment. He snapped his fingers, and the staff ushered every remaining customer out, announcing that they were closing early for the day. He said that as long as young Master Lucian could enjoy himself comfortably, he could bear the minor loss of business. Lucian chuckled. "Oh ho, it's been quite a while since I last went out. You have a good eye. Then again, you need that kind of intuition to survive in this line of work." Hugo apologized again and remarked that it had been a long time since a guest had piled the pot so high. He then asked if he could join Lucian for a game. "Of course," he said with a smile. "I wouldn't stand a chance against a young lord like yourself, but as the manager here, I've picked up a few tricks. At the very least, it should help pass the time." Hans whispered urgently that they should leave. He had a bad feeling about this man. Lucian only smiled, understanding his attendant's fear of Hugo's intimidating appearance. From his previous life, Lucian knew exactly what Hugo would become. One day, he would be known as Black Shark Hugo, a name destined to shake the underworld. His rise would begin in the city's dark alleys. With nothing but brute strength, he would face no real obstacles. He would quickly rise to prominence, extending his reach into gambling, smuggling, and even contract killings, eventually becoming the king of the night who ruled the underworld of 5 territories. Later, using the coming division of the empire as a stepping stone, he would declare himself a baron and be reborn as one of the empire's warlords. For now, however, he was still a rookie. But as Hans had said, he was a dangerous man. And today, Lucian had come to catch this shark. Lucian suggested a simple card game. Hugo agreed and proposed removing any upper limit on the betting to make things more entertaining. Lucian's eyes lit up as he said he had finally found someone who understood him. Hugo, however, was merely trying to bait him, convinced Lucian was just another spoiled brat relying on his family's wealth. Before the game began, Lucian suddenly acted as if he had forgotten something obvious. Hugo was startled but maintained his composure. Lucian said there was something he wished to ask first. He began with sweet talk, praising how a leader's men reflected his character, and complimented Hugo's talent for running such a large establishment, albeit illegally. Hugo sighed, understanding the implication, and gave his word that he would not cause any trouble. Lucian waved it off, saying there was no need to be so stiff. Though he belonged to the Valdek family, he was not so rigid. He said he would appreciate an honest answer. "When do you plan to begin large-scale production?" Hugo frowned, confused, and asked what he was talking about. Lucian smiled faintly. "Come on, you know. That thing you're working on in Bestra." "Of course, the illegal hallucinogen." Hugo's face paled in shock. He slowly tried to act as though he had no idea what Lucian was talking about. Lucian, however, spoke playfully. Come on, you heard me perfectly well. Why pretend? You were instigated by House Logran, weren't you? To destabilize House Valdec by distributing illegal drugs, that is. To think a marquis would issue such lowly orders. There are lines one simply should not cross. Isn't that right, Hugo? Lucian tilted his head slightly before continuing. No, actually, in this case, it would be more accurate to say that you are the more impressive one. To have the gall to commit such an act within House Valdec's territory. Where could one find such courage? The moment something goes wrong and you are caught, everyone associated with House Valdec will clamor to tear you apart. Every last one of them, without exception. As he spoke, Lucian thought to himself, Hugo, your mind must be in complete chaos right now. A plan where failure means death has just been fully exposed to the worst possible party, House Valdec. Originally, this incident was not meant to come to light for another 2 years. Around that time, the Archduke would receive reports of drugs spreading throughout the territory, and although he would raid the base of operations, Hugo would already have fled the city. Hugo finally spoke. Young master, I believe there has been some misunderstanding. I'm just a lowly man earning petty cash at a small shop. Me dealing with drugs? His voice rose as he continued. Surely someone jealous of me has spread these baseless rumors. If you grant me the chance, I will personally uncover the source of these lies. Lucian smiled knowingly. Then I suppose the rice mill you're backing is just an ordinary shop, and the underground passage here merely leads beyond the castle walls. Nothing more than a sewer drain, is that it? He leaned forward slightly. I'll ask you one last time. What stage are you at right now? Hugo's expression crumbled. All his secrets had been laid bare. Even he knew that excuses were pointless now. For a fleeting moment, the thought of killing Lucian crossed his mind. It would be easy enough to take down a noble without an escort. Before he could act, Lucian read his expression and spoke calmly. Think carefully before you act. The stake in this gamble is your very life. You should remember how precariously you climbed to your current position. Those words struck home. Hugo realized how foolish it was to even consider laying a hand on a son of House Valdec. Such an act would only lead him to beg for death. After weighing his options, he understood there was only one way to survive. Hugo dropped to his knees before Lucian. I believe you must have a reason for seeking me out personally. Otherwise, my head would have left my shoulders long ago. I'm ready to do anything you ask. I'll serve you, I'll even be your slave. At his signal, all his men followed suit and knelt. Lucian rose lazily from his chair. A slave wouldn't be so bad, he said lightly. I was just thinking I needed a lackey I could order around. Relief washed over Hugo's face. Lucian then crouched in front of him and continued. But you know, wouldn't that be a little boring? You don't strike me as someone who'd be satisfied as a mere slave. He placed a hand on Hugo's shoulder. Look here, Hugo. Wouldn't you like to try becoming a knight? Hugo fell into deep thought. It had once been a dream he desperately clung to, only to abandon it in the end. Over time, the truth had become painfully clear. No matter how much he honed his skills, no matter how often he risked his life for his masters, he would always remain nothing more than a convenient tool for the nobility. No matter what he did, he could never change the cursed status he was born into. And yet, here it was, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. One he could never refuse. Lucian swore upon the honor of House Valdec. If you one day achieve honor and integrity you won't be ashamed of, then something as trivial as your status will never be an obstacle. He smiled and extended his hand. Hugo, will you not live as a man instead of a tool? Hugo could not speak. He could only stare at his new master. A few days later, Lucian introduced Hugo to the servants of his palace. Everyone was intimidated by his sheer presence alone. After the introductions were complete, Lucian ordered them to bring in the head maid. Not a single servant moved. One of them hesitantly asked why the head maid needed to come here. Lucian replied calmly. Why else? Shouldn't the head maid greet him as well? We wouldn't want to be scolded again like last time, would we? Since she's so busy, we have no choice but to report to her first. Lucian could see it clearly now. Their behavior was exactly as he had expected. The staff had already deteriorated to the point where ordinary methods would no longer work. To them, Lucian was nothing more than a fraying rope, unworthy of holding onto. If that was the case, then he would make sure they understood their mistake. One of the servants stepped forward, attempting to reason with him. "Young master, please consider our position. You know this, don't you? Lord Geordie pays special attention to the head maid. What power do we possibly have?" The others quickly echoed his sentiment. Hans could no longer contain himself. His voice burst out in anger. "All of you, get a grip! Have you completely forgotten your duties? The master of this place is young Master Lucian, not the second young master, Geordie." His voice wavered, and he nearly broke into tears at how shamelessly they were treating Lucian. At that moment, Hugo stepped forward. "Senior Hans, please leave this to me. Your sharp words are far too refined for people like them to understand. Young master, I believe I know what must be done." Lucian feigned delight. "My, already?" Hugo continued coldly. "For bastards who don't know their place, drilling loyalty into them is a simple matter. However, it may get a little rough. I ask for your permission." Lucian looked at him with pride. Hugo truly was quick-witted, one of the reasons Lucian had taken him in. He felt that luck was finally on his side. Hugo was still in the early stages of his involvement with drugs. Had it progressed further, even Lucian might not have been able to rein him in. Lucian placed a hand on Hugo's shoulder and gave his approval. "That's exactly what I wanted." Their eyes darkened with shared intent. "Don't worry about anything," Lucian added. "Give them a proper show." Hugo stepped toward the servant who had spoken back earlier. The man stiffened, half terrified just by Hugo's towering presence. Trying to steady himself, he sneered. "You're stepping in without knowing the situation. You'd be wise to choose the right side. Do you have any idea how cruel Lord Geordie is? You wouldn't risk your life for a few coins, would you?" Hugo looked down at him with contempt. What pathetic last words! After a brief pause, he punched the servant squarely in the face, sending him flying across the room. The others cried out in protest, shocked by the sudden violence. Hans stood frozen, jaw dropped, while Lucian watched with a calm, almost satisfied expression. Hugo made sure they learned their lesson thoroughly. Once they finally understood their position, they dragged the head maid before Lucian. She screamed curses and threats along the way, promising retribution for this humiliation. But the moment she saw the scene before her, her words caught in her throat. Lucian waved at her cheerfully. "You're here. I only asked them to bring you, but it seems everyone got a little too enthusiastic." She struggled against their grip and shouted. "What is the meaning of this? Do you think you can get away with such behavior? If you think I'm afraid, you're gravely mistaken. Lord Geordie will never allow this. Stop now, and I'll make sure today's incident ends here." Now, Lucian interrupted calmly. "Who said anything about ending this?" He picked up the whip resting on his desk and let it dangle loosely in his hand. "This is only the beginning," he said softly. "Head maid, say whatever you wish, because today you will die right here." Execution. Since ancient times, it has been both an ostentatious method and an efficient means of issuing a warning. It carries its own justification, the target is clear, and the message is unmistakably engraved in everyone's mind. In other words, even without purging the entire inner circle, striking a single point is sufficient. And today, Lucian decided to show this truth to his father as well, that the weak and wretched third son no longer existed. The head maid stood face to face with Lucian, but with a simple flick of his finger, his servants rushed forward and forced her to her knees. She smiled as she spoke once more. "Young master, you'd better think this through carefully. You said you'd kill me, but if you leave even a single scratch on me, do you really think Master Geordie will just stand by? Above all, my mother was Master Geordie's nanny. As her daughter, I'm practically his sibling." Lucian idly played with the whip in his hand and asked calmly, "Is that all you have to say? These are your last words, Are you satisfied repeating the same thing? If you keep shouting my brother's name until the moment you die, won't that feel unfair? If you have any other cards to play, show them now. She tried to speak again, but Lucian cut her off. Head maid, you're deeply mistaken about something. I already have more than enough justification to kill you. Insulting a noble, negligence, incitement, embezzlement, and on top of that, you forgot your place simply because you were raised by the same nanny. His gaze sharpened. What do you think the Geordie you're crying out for can actually do? At most, he might strike me a few times and call it a day. But even that won't happen if father intervenes. Or perhaps father might even reward me for disciplining an unruly brat. Lucian continued coldly. Geordie is merely one of the successors. Just like the person standing in front of you. I gave you a chance. You brought this situation upon yourself. Jenny began trembling violently. Her confidence shattered as she stammered. I was wrong, why young master. Please spare me. Lucian told her to consider it bad luck, and lashed her with the whip. Her screams echoed through the hall with every strike. Meanwhile, Geordie was running toward Lucian's palace. This makes no sense, he thought in disbelief as he ran. Just a few days ago, he retreated after being humiliated by Jenny. And now he's running wild, claiming he'll kill her? His thoughts grew frantic. That's not the only strange thing. I planted people in the annex where Lucian stays. The servants should have stopped him. The fact that things have reached this point despite that means he's already taken control of them. Geordie finally halted, completely out of breath. The guards following him tried to calm him. Young master, the report must be wrong. Please calm yourself. Another added. That's right. Considering his personality, it makes no sense for him to harm someone. Above all, he's always been afraid of you, Master Geordie. Geordie was almost convinced, until he heard Jenny's screams coming from Lucian's hall. He sprinted toward the sound and burst inside, only to see a blood-stained whip and Jenny collapsed on the floor, her back torn open. What do you think you're doing right now? Geordie roared. Lucian merely tilted his head toward his brother and replied indifferently. Oh, brother. What brings you here? I'm afraid I'm busy at the moment, so please come back later. I need to uproot this impurity today. He ordered Hugo to pull Jenny back up. At the same time, Geordie shouted. Bring her to me. Now! Lucian lifted his gaze, his voice calm yet lethal. Hugo, if anyone comes within 3 steps, slit the head maid's throat. I'll take full responsibility. I won't let her leave alive under any circumstances, so rest assured. Hugo pressed the tip of his dagger against her throat. Blood immediately began to trickle. Jenny cried out Geordie's name, and his guards froze in place. Put that dagger away! Geordie shouted. If you don't, I'll cut off your head, and the heads of your entire family, and hang them on the castle walls. Hugo replied calmly. I can't do that. My master is Lucian. I have no reason to follow the orders of someone who isn't my master. No matter what happens later, it is my duty to obey his commands. Geordie clenched his fists before finally addressing Lucian directly. What did Jenny do to deserve such cruelty? Lucian closed his eyes and sighed. She insulted her superior, disobeyed orders, and tampered with the budget. I'm simply administering a fitting punishment. He opened his eyes and looked sharply at Geordie. Shouldn't you distinguish between public duty and private feelings? Geordie stood there, completely powerless. Within House Valdec, the first young master, Tristan Valdec, and the second young master, Geordie Valdec, were locked in a succession struggle. In other words, until the decisive day arrived, this period was critical for Geordie above all else. He needed to solidify his position without fail. However, he had recently been publicly humiliated by Lucian. As a result, he suffered a significant loss, having been forced to cast aside his close knight Sir Hendrik. Under such circumstances, if he failed to protect Jenny, someone who functioned as his own hands and feet, this incident would inevitably become a turning point. Distrust would begin to spread, and cracks would form among those who followed him. In short, it was checkmate. Thus, Geordie spoke at last. You win. Let her go. The guards, Hans, and everyone present were stunned. Only Lucian smiled. That wasn't even amusing. Did his brother truly believe he could sweep everything under the rug with a single sentence, after ransacking someone else's livelihood? Did he think his tongue was painted with gold? Nobles, honestly. Lucian replied with clear disinterest. What are you talking about, brother? Win? I merely carried out my duties as the third young master. Besides, embezzlement is a crime no one can escape, regardless of status. If we were to simply cover this up and move on, what would people think? He continued calmly. Since my respected brother is asking so earnestly, I would also like to drop the matter here, but unfortunately, I lack the justification to do so. Geordie clenched his teeth, swallowing his anger. Stop speaking in circles and be direct. What do you want? Lucian answered without hesitation. Since ancient times, those who lay hands on another's property are usually punished by coughing up several times the stolen amount. So, brother, what price did you have in mind? Not long after, the head butler reported the incident to the Archduke. Upon reading the report, the Archduke could scarcely believe it. Is this true? He asked. I confirmed it personally, the butler replied. Master Geordie paid young Master Lucian 10 times the involved amount as compensation. Furthermore, young Master Lucian has recruited an outsider known as Hugo to swiftly root out the spies planted in his annex. As a result, his annex is now more heavily guarded than any other area. The Archduke remained silent for a long while before finally summoning Lucian. When Lucian entered, he immediately sensed something different in his father's gaze. You caused quite a stir recently, the Archduke said. Lucian barely concealed his surprise. It was nothing significant. I merely disciplined servants who failed to recognize their rightful master. The Archduke rested a hand on the back of his chair. However, as a result, you disgraced your brother. He will not forget this easily. Can you bear the consequences? There is nothing to bear, Lucian replied evenly. It was simply a matter of correcting the hierarchy. If I were to shy away from such obvious responsibilities out of fear of retaliation, how could I ever claim the name Valdec? I made a choice that would not bring shame upon our house. The Archduke closed his eyes briefly. If Geordie continues to provoke you, you are free to strike back. However, if the conflict escalates too far and harms the family, I will side with Geordie, regardless of who is right or wrong. Lucian was genuinely shocked. What do you mean by that? The Archduke looked at him as though assessing him anew. Why are you surprised? Though Geordie is impulsive, his contributions to the family over the years are substantial, unlike you, who spent an entire year idling away. As the head of the family, choosing the one who has contributed more is only logical, is it not? After a brief pause, Lucian replied. If I'm not mistaken, that sounds like an instruction to trample my brother and rise above him. The Archduke did not respond directly. Build your strength. Become an asset to the family. When you do, you'll have your answer. It was clear what his father intended, to heighten the sense of crisis and drive Lucian forward. Moreover, if he was stating it so plainly, the succession framework must soon be finalized. That was why he wanted Lucian to seize his opportunity before it slipped away. Lucian wondered if all fathers were like this. Well, if his father was worrying about him this much. Lucian reached into his chest pocket and pulled out some documents. By the way, father, what if I've already prepared my move? And a very big one at that. His father took the sheets into his hands and studied them carefully. After a long pause, he asked, Is this report truly accurate? If you are exaggerating for the sake of merit, tell me now. Lucian replied that it contained nothing but the truth. Moreover, by following the orders issued through House Logran, I was able to secure the insider who was preparing to distribute the drugs. You can verify it immediately. As Lucian spoke, an overwhelming pressure surged through the room. A suffocating aura surrounded him. His father no longer seemed recognizable. Bernhard, that shameless son of a marquis, his father growled. He dares to defile Valdec territory? The pressure crushed down on Lucian, and at that moment, he truly understood what kind of sword protected this empire, and who the master of House Valdek was. He feared that if this continued, he might collapse before anything else happened. Summoning his courage, Lucian maintained a straight face. "Father, may I dare to say one more thing?" His father nodded, asking him to continue. "Even if we report this truth to His Majesty, House Logran will surely cut off their tail and escape responsibility. All involvement was carried out through subordinate merchant guilds. On the surface, there is no trace of their direct participation. Furthermore, even if we force the issue and dig deeper, His Majesty, wary of factional conflict, will inevitably intervene." As he listened, his father studied Lucian closely, wondering when his son had developed such sharp political judgment. Lucian continued, almost as if thinking aloud. "In other words, despite committing such an atrocious act against House Valdek, they would merely lose a source of income. Shouldn't we at least take an arm in return?" His father slowly sat back in his chair. "I need an explanation. What exactly do you intend to do?" Lucian met his gaze with confidence. "A method to ensure they cannot escape. I have already secured it. Not long ago, an insider surrendered to me. He holds no noble title, but he earned Logran's deep trust and rose to the rank of executive." The Archduke recalled the head butler's earlier report. Was this the same man Lucian was referring to now? Had Lucian anticipated all of this? Placing a hand on the desk, his father asked. "You intend to use a traitor to set a counter-trap?" "That's correct," Lucian replied. "From their perspective, it would be unthinkable for an executive who handled the drug operation to betray them. I've made arrangements so they believe their plans are proceeding smoothly. It won't be long before a key figure from House Logran is forced to step forward personally." His father frowned. "That is not a decision to be taken lightly. There is a fatal flaw in your plan. You are betting everything on a single variable. A traitor from the back alleys. Human nature cannot be defied, Lucian. When dealing with someone untrustworthy, you must remember that you cannot take even a single step together." Lucian answered carefully. "I am not betting on the man himself. I am betting on his desire. He wishes to become a knight, to spread his fame across the empire, and to carve his name into history." His father scoffed. "An ambition that forgets one's place." "But for a man," Lucian countered, "it is also a dream worth craving madly. I choose to believe in that dream." The Archduke contemplated this for a long moment before speaking. "That is a remarkably sentimental reason." He then asked, "What will you do if everything collapses?" Lucian answered without hesitation. "If that happens, I will not evade responsibility. My mistake will be mine alone. I will pay the price, even if it means staking my own neck." His father turned away, closing his eyes briefly. "Once your body recovers, return to the training grounds. I will personally teach you the Lionheart sword. From this moment onward, you are also a candidate for the next head of the house." Later that night, Archduke Sigmund sat in his nightgown, browsing through his private library, when the head butler approached him to apologize. "I am deeply ashamed, my lord," the butler said, "that within Kelheim, the heart of House Valdek, I failed to prevent such acts." The Archduke closed his book. "Enough. It was I who directed your focus toward the border issues. I know better than anyone that your body is already strained by your workload. The fact that the third son discovered this first was merely a matter of luck. Bernhard invested great effort into concealing this operation." The butler nodded. "It seems his objective was neither money nor expansion, but rather a deliberate attempt to tarnish your honor, my lord." The Archduke turned toward him. "He likely intended to use this as a pretext to manipulate His Majesty later. Knowing the Empire's fragile state, how could a Marquis act with such narrow self-interest? More importantly, who is this Hugo who has attached himself to the third son?" The butler replied. "On the surface, he is known as a ruffian who manages a gambling den. In truth, he was the leader of a fledgling organization that even the underworld took notice of. He is not a man who would normally serve under another. For young Master Lucian to personally seek him out and make him a subordinate, His growth is truly remarkable. The Archduke stared at the floor, troubled. Growth, you say? He knew well that Hugo was a man forged in the underworld, where cunning and cruelty ruled. A man like that would never follow empty promises. He had clearly seen something in Lucian. A liege lord worth staking his life on. It is earlier than expected, the Archduke said at last. But since the third son has proven his capability, I will open the path for him accordingly. Starting tomorrow, I will have him learn the family's secret techniques. The butler praised the decision and asked whom the Archduke intended to appoint as Lucian's swordsmanship instructor. Sir Eisen, the Archduke replied. The butler stiffened at the name. It is unfortunate to disturb his seclusion in his later years, the Archduke continued, but this will surely be meaningful for him as well. When Hans received the news that Lucian had been chosen as a candidate for succession, he burst into tears of joy. He kept asking over and over if it was really true. Lucian grew tired of repeating himself, so he asked Hugo to do something about the overly emotional boy. Hugo walked over and casually lifted Hans into the air, telling his senior to calm down. Given the young master's qualities, isn't this only natural? He said. And considering the path he'll walk from now on, it wouldn't do for his right-hand man to be this shaken. Hans blushed deeply at the words right-hand man. What do you mean, right-hand man? He protested. It's true that I've served the young master the longest, but I'm lacking in so many ways. Besides, with an outstanding talent like you here, Junior, how could I possibly? Hugo held him up like a toy and laughed. Humble as always. As expected of Senior Hans. But why do you keep doing that, left-hand man? Lucian watched their playful exchange and smiled faintly. Experienced hires really were different. Hans, Lucian said gently, what Hugo said isn't wrong. Before it's officially announced within the house, informing only the two of you follows the same logic. Hans was timid by nature, and his frailty could easily become a weakness. However, he genuinely cared for Lucian and possessed the grit to remain steadfast by his side even in adverse conditions. If he could gain experience and grow, becoming someone capable of managing internal affairs, he would one day become a more reliable rearguard than anyone else. As for Hugo, there was no room to doubt his ability. Lucian merely needed to open the path for him to become a knight. Only then could Hugo's talents be drawn out to their fullest, allowing him to serve Lucian as a powerful sword in the future. Now was the time to prioritize quality over quantity. One by one, Lucian simply needed to nurture them properly. It's going to get very busy from now on, Lucian said. The road ahead is not one I can walk alone. It's a journey that can only be completed together with you. Hugo bowed slightly and replied with utmost sincerity. I will not disappoint you, young master. Hans followed immediately, making the same promise. In his past life, Lucian had scoured every corner of the continent in search of a single thing, the essence of the ancestors' martial arts said to elevate the realm of the sword forms. Among them existed a realm one step higher, advanced sword forms. Yet despite suffering like a dog, what he ultimately obtained was neither the advanced sword forms he so desperately craved nor even the intermediate forms reserved for knight captains. Instead, all he managed to acquire was a degraded version used by apprentice knights. Sword forms were not something one could easily access without noble blood. For a mere mercenary, even gaining the chance to learn a single sword form was nothing short of a blessing from the heavens. And yet those who were no match for him learned higher-ranking sword forms and crushed him with ease. Each time he failed to protect his squad members because of that gap, the thirst and obsession for sword forms gnawed at his soul. But now, for someone like Lucian, an unexpected opportunity had arrived. Passed down only to House Valdek's successor candidate, and their closest aides, an ancient sword form that far surpassed even advanced sword forms. The chance to learn the Lionheart sword. How extraordinary must such swordsmanship be? Lucian was tense even before the lessons began. Though the scheduled time was still some distance away, his excitement had driven him to pace the training grounds since dawn. It would be best to calm his mind with circulation exercises before the lesson. In his previous life, he had learned swordsmanship without any proper system, stealing techniques or piecing together scraps of knowledge. He hadn't even had someone he could call a master. Living a second life truly was something else. As Lucian focused on steadying his nerves through various exercises, he failed to notice that someone had been observing him all along. After a long while, the old man gazed down at him and thought, "A considerable amount of time has passed, yet he hasn't wavered even once. Was there some sort of trigger? I don't see even a trace of his former weak self." The man recalled the moment Lucian's father had asked him to become the boy's teacher. Over drinks, the Archduke had said, "I thought there was no hope, but looking again, there are aspects worth noting. If nothing else, it may serve as a brief entertainment for you, Sir Eisen." Eisen had replied, "If your grace says so, then his talent must not be ordinary." The Archduke shook his head. "Talent? Rather than that, his mindset surprised me. You'll understand what I mean once you see for yourself." And so, the sword saint Eisenbrainer had begun testing Lucian's mindset, long before ever meeting him. A sword saint is a superhuman who has awakened by reaching the limits of circulation, a supreme title granted to one who has attained the pinnacle of sword forms. Even in the long history of the Empire, such figures are exceedingly rare. To swordsmen, a sword saint is nothing short of a god. And now, such a legendary figure stood right before Lucian's eyes. Eisen bowed slightly and spoke. "It has been several years since I last saw you, during His Grace's birthday celebration, third young master. Beginning today, I will be the one instructing you. My name is Eisenbrainer." Lucian recalled the hint Hans had given him that morning, that he would be learning sword forms from a knight who had served the Waldeck family since the previous generation. How could he have omitted the most important detail, that this man was the sword saint himself? Lucian bowed deeply in return, acknowledging him as his master. "It would be my honor to receive your teachings, Sir Eisen." Eisen smiled faintly. "I am merely a man hidden behind an undeserved title, nothing more than an old man. Furthermore, you are a successor candidate, third young master. How can you bow your head so easily?" Lucian replied sincerely. "While I cannot diminish the standing of my family, how could I neglect proper respect? Setting aside the relationship between master and student, you are someone worthy of respect. If you insist, then please act as you feel most comfortable, young master. Thank you for your understanding. Then let us begin the training immediately." "Yes. That sounds good." Eisen extended his arm toward the outdoor training grounds and asked, "Third young master, would you like to run around the grounds?" Without the slightest hesitation, Lucian stepped forward and asked if he could begin right away. Eisen, however, looked slightly troubled and motioned for him to wait. "Is something wrong?" Lucian asked. "Do you not have any questions?" Eisen replied. "Why you are running, how long you must run, what meaning this activity holds. I am curious, of course," Lucian said with a proud smile. "But didn't you order it because it is necessary? There must be a reason you felt no need to explain. A student receiving instruction should simply follow the master's words." Eisen observed Lucian's gaze and reactions, so distinctly different from those of the other young masters. In that instant, he understood. This child possessed a pure and genuine longing for the sword. Now he truly grasped what His Grace had meant. "Very well, third young master," Eisen said. "Then let us begin at once." Lucian immediately broke into a sprint, his figure vanishing across the empty training grounds. There was another reason Lucian followed the order without hesitation. He had already guessed the true purpose of the run, to measure his qualifications as a disciple, to gauge his potential. He had used the same method in his past life as a mercenary captain. Assign a seemingly trivial task to a rookie, and from their reaction alone, you could learn a great deal. Since he had already demonstrated his mindset with his response, only one thing remained: tenacity. Lucian resolved to run until he collapsed. 1 hour later, Lucian could hardly believe what was happening. "What is this? This can't be right. I've been running nonstop, yet I'm not tired at all. In fact, the more I run, the lighter my body feels. All I did to recover was drink mass-produced nectar, and my only exercise was walking. How is this possible? From a distance, Aizen watched Lucian's unwavering form and thought to himself. Making him run was only meant to assess his general condition. I held no expectations for his physical abilities, yet this defies all logic. Not a single drop of sweat flowed from Lucian's body. His breathing remained calm and steady, like the surface of a still lake. Even knights who had trained their mana for years would struggle to maintain such a state. Could it be? Aizen stepped forward and ordered Lucian to stop. Lucian came to a halt and asked, "Is something wrong? To be utilizing mana so naturally at this level?" Aizen said slowly. "Third young master, I have one question. This morning, when you calmed your mind and body, was that circulation, not meditation?" "If you are referring to what I did at the indoor training grounds," Lucian replied, "then yes. I performed circulation. There is nothing better for clearing one's thoughts." Aizen's suspicion was confirmed. "Please forgive me, but I must examine your physical condition," Aizen said. "Even if you feel something unusual, do not move." He took Lucian's palm and pressed his mana-infused fingers against his pulse. After several moments, Aizen's eyes widened in disbelief. He had suspected as much, but Lucian had already reached the endpoint of circulation, just like him. No. It went even further than that. This child? Aizen thought, his breath catching. He is opening an entirely new path. Aizen asked Lucian, "Third son, since when has this been the case? Exactly when did you reach the end of circulation?" Lucian asked what he meant by reaching the end. Aizen had just examined his body and immediately concluded that the purity of his mana was like snow on a pristine field, and his internal structure was formed in a shape perfect for maximizing mana efficiency to its limit, like a water wheel. This was a stage that only a tiny minority of martial artists, who had trained their entire lives, could ever reach. Lucian had expected it to some extent, but he had already reached a stage close to perfection. In that case, there was no need to hide it any longer. So, in answer to Aizen's question, Lucian said it had been a month since he started circulation, and all his mana paths had been open from the very beginning. He had certainly heard that circulation was usually accompanied by pain and blockages, but he had experienced none of those at all. Lucian was even farther beyond Aizen's expectations. Even Aizen himself had reached that point only after decades of perseverance. Perhaps the ancient swordsmen who were said to split mountains and seas were not legends, but the truth. Disregarding any disrespect his next words might cause, Aizen spoke. "Would you be willing to give up the successor position of House Valdek?" Lucian's eyes widened at his words. "Sir Aizen, what are you saying? Give up the successor position? Is there some problem with my body? Like I can't learn sword forms, or something terrible will happen if I use mana?" Aizen replied that it was the exact opposite. Lucian's body was truly an ideal vessel. Not only could he draw out the efficiency of mana and the body to their limits, but he also possessed the potential to see beyond that. In other words, if he focused on the sword, becoming the next sword saint would not be an issue for him. Lucian knew his body was extraordinary, but this situation was far beyond his expectations. Thanks to the fortune of being able to learn the ancient sword of the Lionheart sword, he had thought he had gained a path to reach the stage he had yearned for so much in his past life. But to be able to look beyond that, to the pinnacle of the sword, was something else entirely. And with this body, it seemed easily within reach. So Lucian asked Aizen if there was a reason he had mentioned choosing one or the other. Was it because he could not pursue both the successor position and the path of the sword saint? Yes, that was the only reason behind Aizen's question. To be precise, he did not have much time left to live. Thanks to the power of circulation, he could still move like this at nearly 100 years old, but he could no longer deny the gradual aging of his body. If he had to pass down everything while he was still alive, it would be a tight schedule even if the third son focused solely on the sword. Lucian knew from his past that the sword saint would die in 8 years. It was certainly true that there wasn't much time left. Ideally, he would have wanted to accept the sword saint's offer and focus entirely on the sword. However, the turbulent times of the future were not a world that could be navigated by martial power alone. Those who survived amid that chaos were the ones who possessed legitimacy. It was a moment he had waited for a very long time, but he apologized and rejected the offer. Lucian said he wished to remain a Valdec until the end. He had been given an offer far beyond his station, and he was sorry that he could not accept it. But Eisen said he was the one who should be sorry for putting him in such a difficult position. It was just that, through Lucian, he had wanted to leave something of himself in this world. Lucian thought about that for a while and then smiled. He asked if, by any chance, there were another talented individual besides him, what would he do? Meanwhile, a butler hurried to his master to confirm the news about Lucian after checking the facts. Joshua Valdec, the fourth son and Lucian's younger brother, was riding a horse when he suddenly brought it to a halt upon hearing the report. He asked whether all those ridiculous stories were real. The butler told him that it was exactly as the rumors said. The Archduke had included the third son in the line of succession, and he was currently under the guidance of Sir Eisen, confirmed to be receiving swordsmanship training. Joshua shot him an irritated glance. He's truly a stumbling block from the start. It's hard enough establishing a support base while being pushed around by my two older brothers, and now the neutral factions have yet another option. Would it kill him to just stay stuck in the corner of his room? The butler asked Joshua to calm down a bit, but how could he in a situation like this? What if even the talents he had barely gathered started to waver? It already made his blood boil to have to call Lucian, who was only a few months older than him, brother. He could not sit still anymore. There had to be a way to get rid of him. Since Lucian had begun learning swordsmanship, he would soon need a sparring partner. Joshua ordered the butler to prepare 2 sharp swords, not wooden training swords, but real combat blades. He needed to teach Lucian that nothing had changed. Lucian said it might take him some time to find that person, but he assured Eisen that it would be someone who would more than make up for the lost time, someone capable of leaving the mark of Sword Saint Eisen for hundreds of years to come. Eisen was quiet for a moment, and then said, "My heart is heavy, as I seem to have unintentionally placed a burden on the third young master. It is enough that you think of this old man in such a way. So please do not trouble yourself with that matter any further. I am grateful for your words alone." Lucian must have seemed too desperate to make him feel better. Even the most renowned swordsman failed to catch Eisen's eye, so it was only natural for him to doubt a novice who had just picked up a sword and was offering to bring him a disciple. However, Lucian did not want such a brilliant talent to fade away, so he told Eisen to look forward to it. If this body, Lucian's, was a heaven-sent vessel acknowledged by the Sword Saint, then there must also be someone with a heaven-sent talent for the sword. In the past, despite having a humble physical constitution and learning only degraded sword forms, he had been the embodiment of the sword and had swept the battlefield on pure talent alone. Felix, also known as the Sword Demon. He would be the strongest vessel, and he would become the disciple to inherit everything from Eisen. This could only be proven once Lucian found that person, so for now, they resumed their training. Eisen said that before learning any sword forms, he would first examine how much Lucian had achieved. He instructed Lucian to perform vertical, horizontal, and then diagonal cuts in that order. Since Lucian had performed circulation, he should be able to manipulate mana, so for the final move, Eisen asked him to demonstrate a strike with mana infused into the sword. This was the first time he was holding a sword in Lucian's body. He thought he would need to adjust his skill level to some extent. Since Lucian was said to have learned a little swordsmanship before, he tried to follow the instructions while matching them to that level. After he finished, he was so satisfied with his movements that he suspected Sir Eisen would want to see more. Eisen looked at him for a moment, and said that he had some expectations about his skills, but once again, Lucian had surprised him. In a word, his skills were absolutely terrible. Lucian's expression fell. Eisen said he was full of bad habits when wielding the sword, ignoring the basics and swinging only out of desperation to survive, like the sword of a mercenary. By focusing solely on power and speed, he had disrupted the balance between his body and mana, dulling the sword's sharpness and creating gaps between his movements. Furthermore, regarding the final strike, Eisen asked Lucian how long he thought it had taken to infuse mana into the sword. Lucian replied that since he was infusing mana into the sword, it likely took a little over 1 or 2 seconds. The air shifted, and Eisen's wooden sword was suddenly at Lucian's neck. "That little you mentioned so lightly," he said, "is enough time to take an opponent's head. You must first understand the weight of that time. Your enemy will never take that instant lightly." Lucian's entire mind and body froze at the thought. He had not even noticed the sword until it touched his neck. To die with his head cut off without even realizing it, he had still been harboring such complacent thoughts. Those few seconds showed Lucian exactly where he stood, and what he needed to learn and face. He cleared his mind of all pride and said that he would firmly engrave Aizen's words into his heart and first correct his bad habits and mindset. Aizen said that even with a naturally gifted body, one is not omnipotent. He could not defeat a skilled mana user relying solely on physical strength. If the body could not properly support the mana, it would lead to wasted power and openings, ultimately inviting crisis. To draw out the true power of the sword, the internal and external forces, though seemingly different, must become a single flow. True might is born from that harmony. Aizen knew these words might not fully sink in if left as mere advice, so he paired them with a spectacle. Attacking a wooden dummy, he destroyed it into nothing but splinters in a fraction of a second. This was the path of the sword that Lucian must walk from now on. A few days later, during their training, Aizen continued giving Lucian lessons on his form, methods, and balance. As they sparred, more like Lucian attacking a dummy in human form, Aizen said his mana flow must not be interrupted. Just as training the body allows for precise movement, his mana control must also reach that same level. When wielding mana while reinforcing his entire body, he must leave enough power to circulate separately, deploying it in the right place at the right time. When these factors mesh together to form a balance, only then will he understand the true power of the sword. When that spar came to an end, Aizen laced his wooden sword with mana and told Lucian to apply what he had just learned and try to defend himself. However, he wanted to introduce a slightly more advanced step. Lucian should consider the enemy's speed and movements, and respond with the appropriate amount of force. As the attack came soaring toward Lucian, he thought, the essence of Sir Aizen's teaching is the union of naturalness, like the flow of water. Through this, one overcomes the gap and minimizes the loss of power to exert maximum force. With this realization, he forced his mind not to be overwhelmed, looked straight ahead, and managed to stop Aizen's attack with his own mana-infused sword. After that, Aizen did not give any feedback or speak about it. He simply said they could end the day's training there. He told Lucian to engrave the sensation he felt today within himself. That alone would be enough to make him a first-rate swordsman. Lucian collapsed from exhaustion and thanked Aizen for today's lesson. After a while, when the workers entered the training grounds to repair it, they looked at the damage and wondered what kind of training Lucian was undergoing. They worried whether he would be alright after this. Lucian, who could not yet bring himself to return to his room, sat against the wall and felt thankful that he had survived today's training as well. It was absurd to think that this harsh method was ultimately intended to strip away the bad habits from his past life. But what could he do? If this was what it took to fix them, then so be it. Anyway, he looked at Sir Aizen, who was sitting across from him, and thought that the more he watched him, the more in awe he became. Aizen constantly created crises tailored to his skill level and drew out the correct reaction with precise instructions. That was something far easier said than done. It would be impossible unless he completely saw through the condition of his body. Until now, Lucian had believed that the secrets of excellent sword forms were the path to reaching a higher realm. He had never thought deeply about balance, reserve power, and flow the way he had this time. If he had known these teachings in his past life, he wondered how much closer his sword might have come to that man. He felt a little disappointed that today's training had ended like this. He wondered if there was a perfect opponent for him somewhere out there. And right then, Joshua walked into the training grounds with his butler. He approached Aizen and greeted him as his disciple. Aizen asked the reason for his visit, as he was currently training Lucian. If Joshua had any words to share with him, he could come back later. Joshua said there was no need for that. He had come today to help his brother in training, since he had learned these things before him despite being younger. He then turned toward Lucian and asked what he thought of that proposal. Lucian was more than happy, as a perfect opponent had just strolled right in. Aizen said, "Fourth young master, what is the meaning of this? Helping with the third young master's training." Joshua said, "Isn't there a training method where we spar to test the practical application of mana control? I would like to serve as his opponent." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "As you know, master, given the current times, I haven't had many opportunities to interact with my brothers. Moments like this are rare, so I took the liberty of approaching you, even at the risk of seeming rude." "Please allow it, master." Lucian watched quietly. For what it's worth, the spawn of this household has quite the knack for talking their way into things. Helping with training? Bonding with his brother? That might have sounded convincing, if he hadn't walked in carrying a real sword to face someone who hadn't even had a week of formal lessons. It's so obvious it's almost innocent. The goal was clear: crush him and solidify his own position. And since it came under the pretense of helping his older brother, there won't be any problems, and if Sword Saint observes, the spar will carry weight as well. Even a fuzz-faced brat is keeping me in check like this, even Sir Eisen is telling me to give up in the line of succession. Lucian narrowed his eyes. But if I back down now, it'll only make things harder for Sir Eisen. Lucian stepped forward. Sir Eisen, please accept my younger brother's proposal. He smiled faintly. Isn't the enthusiasm of youth admirable? Then his tone hardened just a little. Of course, such rudeness and that mindset. It's something I cannot overlook. I will personally educate this immature child. His gaze locked onto his opponent. Let today be the last day you indulge in childish behavior. And do try not to put Sir Eisen in a difficult position anymore. Sir Eisen sighed inwardly. The third young master clearly understands the fourth's intentions. If this escalated head-on, blood would inevitably be shed. If both of you insist, he said at last, I will permit it. However, this will be the final spar of this kind. I will intervene immediately if it becomes dangerous. I understand, both replied. Lucian's lips curled into a faint, unsettling smile. Let's have a wonderful sparring match, youngest. His brother answered with an equally forced calm, though his irritation was obvious. That sounds good, brother. Moments later, they stood facing each other on the training grounds. Sir Eisen addressed them firmly. This is not a fight to harm one another. It is a spar to assess what you've learned. He turned to Lucian. As this is your first spar, third young master, you must approach it with the mindset of learning. Then, to the other, and as the senior, fourth young master, you bear responsibility. His voice grew heavier. Both of you, fight in a way that brings no shame to the name of House Valdek. A brief pause. If you are ready, draw your swords. Lucian exhaled slowly. Joshua thought Lucian Valdek, since when did you start acting like a proper older brother? He almost scoffed. Ending every sentence with youngest, youngest. When you were just born a little earlier than me. Yet he's so annoying. Fine, let's see if you can keep that tone by the end of this spar. Blood is irrelevant in our hierarchy. You will learn who is truly above. Lucian tilted his head slightly. What a vicious expression. Even when facing mortal enemies, I wouldn't make a face like that. Still. This weight in my hands, this cold steel. It's been 2 months. Back then, in his previous life, he would have used every dirty trick imaginable to win. But now, I stand here as the third young master. If he used techniques from his past life, Sir Eisen would notice instantly. And despite everything, he's still just a child. My younger brother. So I'll keep this, within reason. Why are you just standing there, hesitating? Joshua's mocking voice cut through his thoughts. Where did all that confidence go? Does it finally feel real now that you're holding an actual sword? He smirked. Don't worry too much. They say accidents happen during real sword spars, but that only applies when the opponents are evenly matched. Then, almost kindly, if you're scared, I can switch to a wooden sword. Lucian nodded calmly. You're right. That would be best. Then his eyes sharpened. I take back what I said about keeping things within reason. If you don't want to get hurt, that is for a disobedient younger brother. A beating is the only cure, youngest. That word younger hit like a spark to dry tinder. He lunged forward. I'll make you regret those words. Lucian didn't move. He simply stood there, as if waiting. As expected, teaching him under these restrictions won't be easy. Joshua had trained under the Sword Saint. His fundamentals weren't something to dismiss. And I've already exhausted most of my mana, with the Sword Saint earlier. Still, his lack of experience is something he can't hide. To fall for such a light provocation so easily. Lucian's focus sharpened. Concentrate, control the flow, 1 moment is enough. Joshua closed the distance, but suddenly Lucian lunged towards him in an instant and was about to strike, and in that instant, the entire training ground froze. Lucian spoke calmly, grip your teeth and block, or else you'll bite your tongue, youngest. The news spread through the family like wildfire, despite being told in whispers. Hey, did you hear? One servant asked eagerly. They say young Lord Lucian completely overwhelmed Lord Joshua. Another scoffed. Don't be ridiculous. Young Lord Lucian only picked up a sword recently. How could that even be possible? Servant, lowering his voice. That's what I thought too, but Sir Eisen himself witnessed it. In another place, a maid said, well, barely containing a grin, the fourth young master went in full of confidence, and came back looking like a drenched kitten. I even heard he cried. Naturally, the story didn't just spread, it evolved. And at the center of it all were Hugo and Hans. When Hugo entered, the servant immediately surrounded him. Tell us what really happened. What are the details? Come on, don't hold back. A maid chimed in excitedly. Perfect timing, Hans. Is it true the Sword Saint himself acknowledged young Master Lucian's talent? Hugo blinked, slightly overwhelmed. Has it already spread that far? He glanced around, then lowered his voice dramatically. All right, but this is top secret. Hans said after young Master Lucian subdued Lord Joshua. You should have seen the looks on their faces. And then, he even took Joshua's sword as a trophy. Gasps rippled through the group. Only a few knew the truth. This entire storm of rumors had been carefully orchestrated by one person. Meanwhile, Lucian strolled, enjoying the crisp air. Perfect weather, he murmured, almost pleased. The kind where rumors spread effortlessly. A faint smile crossed his lips. Consider yourself lucky it ended like this, youngest. The memory replayed in his mind. Lucian had raised his sword. Brother! Lucian's voice cut through sharply. Am I only your brother at times like this? That single line made Joshua hesitate. I was wrong, brother Lucian. But the next moment, Lucian's blade struck down, shattering Joshua's sword cleanly. Within moments, it was over. Lucian looked down at him calmly. Joshua, if you try something like this again, it won't end so lightly. His tone sharpened just enough to sting. Learn where you can push your limits, and where you absolutely shouldn't. If you understand, nod. Joshua nodded so quickly it was almost impressive. Lucian turned away, thinking, that should keep the troublesome fourth young master quiet for a while. Then his gaze shifted. Now that internal matters are settled, shall we deal with House Law Grand? Later, Lucian presented a document to his father. His father glanced at it. So, this is the secret message Hugo brought you? Yes, father. Lucian spoke steadily. 1 week from now, in Vestra, they are scheduled to make contact with someone from House Logran. His father frowned slightly. Vestra? That's absurd. Even if the territory has lost its function, it's still very close to Kelheim. Lucian nodded. They likely chose it precisely because they believed your attention wouldn't reach there. A blind spot, his father muttered. Then he looked up. So why bring this to me? I entrusted this matter to you. Lucian met his gaze without hesitation. I need power. He continued calmly, just because a beast is trapped doesn't mean I have the tools to hunt it. His father's eyes narrowed slightly. So you came to me because I have those tools? A faint edge entered his voice. You speak of earning merit, yet it sounds like you intend to ride on my back. He leaned forward. A hunter earns his name by catching prey with his own strength. If you rely on others, it becomes nothing more than a half measure. His gaze sharpened. I gave you both authority and opportunity. Yet you chose safety over challenge. Is that truly the best choice you could make? Answer me, Lucian. Lucian didn't flinch. If it ensures the hunt succeeds, I will choose that path without hesitation. His voice remained steady. If the path you speak of is the royal path, then it is one only those with power can walk. He continued, while people tremble in fear of the beast, insisting that only those who personally thrust the spear are brave, is nothing more than recklessness. Even if it succeeds, it is blind courage. And in time, that kind of thinking loses trust. Lucian's eyes sharpened slightly. I believe the essence of the hunt isn't in catching the prey, but in protecting what must be protected. If I secure the result, does it matter if others call it a half measure? He added, almost thoughtfully, that doesn't mean I'll hoard the credit like a saint pretending to be virtuous. But if the one I pass that credit to proves incapable of fulfilling their role, then the one who inherits the bow will eventually be decided. Silence filled the room. Then, that answer is sufficient. His father leaned back. It's been a long time since someone spoke to me so directly. A faint smile appeared. I didn't expect such words from you. It was a good answer, Lucian. His voice deepened. A man must have conviction in the path he walks. If he wavers at every word, he accomplishes nothing. Lucian blinked slightly. Don't tell me this was a test. His father nodded. Yes. It was a test. I wanted to see whether you would falter before authority. He continued, unless a man finds his own answers, who would follow him? Someone without conviction isn't fit to lead, let alone to be called a man. Lucian exhaled quietly. No wonder. You knew this was beyond my current ability from the start. A test, huh? Father really doesn't make anything easy. He spoke again. Then, regarding support, his father interrupted calmly. I will provide the necessary tools. His tone turned serious. If we move a large force, they'll notice. They'll respond with a small, alert unit instead. Lucian smiled faintly. That's correct, father. Then, if possible, I request a few skilled knights from the family. Will that suffice? His father's gaze hardened. I will give you the Black Lions. A heavy pause followed. The weight of this seat, carry it yourself. Lucian's smile deepened, just slightly. Now things were getting interesting. 1 week later they came to a halt. Lucian looked around, unimpressed. This city is a mess. His gaze swept across the empty streets. It's far more desolate than I expected. There's barely a trace of life here. Hugo nodded. Although it's close to Kelheim, it lacks resources. It's been a long time since it lost its role as a transit city. He gestured toward the abandoned structures. Now, only vagrants pass through occasionally. That's exactly why we chose this place for the manufacturing plant. Then, after a brief pause, he asked, But are you really not going to tell me? Lucian glanced at him. How do you know my plans in such detail? Hugo continued. Even Senior Hans had no idea. Lucian gave a small, knowing smile. I'll explain that later. He shifted his focus. For now, let's concentrate on the task at hand. Everything is prepared as planned, right? Of course, Hugo replied confidently. Inside the plant, everything matches the reports we sent them. The layout, the equipment, we even prepared the goods the young master requested. He added, all that's left is the reinforcement to subdue them. Lucian studied him for a moment. Does it bother you that we're receiving my father's support? Hugo shook his head immediately. Not at all. This matter is too important. Failure isn't an option. Then his voice softened slightly. I just regret my own lack of strength. If I were capable enough, this entire achievement could have belonged to you alone, young master. Lucian placed a hand on his shoulder. Hugo, I understand how you feel. His tone was calm but firm. But we've only just begun rowing. If we rush out of impatience, we'll lose our direction. You're only 30. There's plenty of time ahead of you. Hugo blinked. I'm 23, and 30 is still very far away. Then, with a hint of dry humor, the age difference between us isn't that big either, young master. Lucian froze. What? An awkward silence followed. Lucian cleared his throat. Right. Since you've just turned 20. Hugo sighed. Please don't try to correct yourself. It somehow makes it worse. Lucian quickly changed the subject. Anyway, the appointed time is approaching. He frowned slightly. But why don't I see them anywhere? Third young master. The sudden voice cut through the air. In an instant, both Lucian and Hugo stiffened. The killing intent alone was enough to send a chill down their spines. Hugo's hand flew to his sword. But before he could fully draw it, it stopped. Too slow a figure stood before them, effortlessly blocking Hugo's blade. I cannot consider your combat ability satisfactory. Hugo's eyes widened. My sword isn't moving? No matter how much strength he applied, the blade refused to budge. I've never been overpowered like this. Lucian raised a hand calmly. It's fine, Hugo. He looked at the man. He's not our enemy. Then his gaze sharpened. But drawing killing intent toward us, what exactly is your intention, Black Lion? Hugo stepped back slightly, still stunned. Young master, could it be the reinforcements you mentioned? The rumored Black Lion? The ones who handle all of House Valdek's shadow operations, the strongest force only the family head can command. Lucian nodded. Yes, Hugo. These are the hunters assigned to this mission. The Black Lions. The man before them bowed slightly. We greet the third young master. His tone was steady. What you just experienced was merely a test of your attendant's reaction and response. We hold no hostility. Lucian observed them carefully. So the rumors weren't exaggerated after all. Even in his past life, their existence had been vague, more myth than fact. I didn't let my guard down, yet I didn't sense a thing. Even now, standing right in front of him, their presence was completely concealed. Each one of them is a monster. Lucian exhaled quietly. Father really didn't hold back on support. He stepped forward. I trust you are already familiar with the mission. House Logran has taken the bait and is on its way here. His voice turned cold. There is only one objective. Capture the one in charge alive. Eliminate the rest. They crossed the line. There is no reason to show leniency. He added calmly, I leave the execution to your discretion. The leader studied him silently. So the Archduke didn't send us merely to hand him an achievement. Even in an unexpected situation, Lucian had maintained his composure, calculated, controlled, prepared. Perhaps, a new wind is beginning to blow. We will follow your orders. Not long after, a group approached the area. At their center stood a young noble, visibly irritated. What a dreadfully boring journey. He stepped down, brushing dust off his coat with clear disdain. If it weren't for Father's orders, I wouldn't have set foot in such a remote, miserable place. He glanced around with disgust. I'll finish this quickly and return to the main estate. A scoff. Even the air here is unpleasant. The fourth son of House Logran, Philip Logran, had arrived. If you like this recap, make sure to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more awesome manhwa stories.